Oh, well, good evening to one. Good evening to all. Kia ora. Haere mai. Welcome on in. Good evening, Jeremy. How are you,
Good
sir?
evening, Pat. I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Very, 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 very busy at the moment. Spent about 10 hours in the studio today doing a couple of other things and getting ready for tonight. So it's been a busy, busy day. And I have to say, I'm very much looking forward to the weekend to have 2 days where I will lock my laptop in the studio and myself perhaps in the chair. It's going to be a snowy weekend down here in Otago, apparently. Maybe not in
Oh, is it?
Dunedin. Yeah,
Right.
but this neck of the woods. So probably load up the firewoods, get them ready, watch a whole bunch of TV and movies and just chill. So I'm looking forward to that. How about you?
Very nice. I'm kind of the opposite, actually. I had a very busy start to the week, and then today reasonably quiet, and then my weekends are starting to get busy again, which is with work, which has not been the case for the last 3.5 years or 2.5 years, whatever it is. So yeah, I was going to say I am kind of looking forward to the weekend, but it won't be quite as relaxing as yours. I've got shows to do and things like that. You know, all that crazy stuff that used to be a normal weekend.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
because we're sort of getting back to, well, it's quite interesting about getting back to normal. We won't talk about this just yet, but people have probably seen the headlines. You know, COVID raging through Dancing with the Stars.
Mm.
And you're just like, are we actually capable of live stuff yet? Does it actually really work? So are you kind of, is it comedy clubs? Is it Auckland based? Are you touring yet? What's the plan?
A
Where
bit
can
of
people
everything,
see you?
really. Yeah, well, I'm doing a football club this Saturday in Glenfield in Auckland, which is a gig that's been running. They do an annual gig that's been running for 15 years or something. And then I'm in Kerry next weekend at the Turner Centre, the newly. I'm not sure if it's new or newly refurbished or certainly newly managed art centre up there. And then what else have I got? I've got Westport coming up, just bits and pieces. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
doing a big, full noise tour or anything, just a few shows, some of which were, postponed from ages ago. But
Gotcha.
we're sort of back. I still have a little bit of a nerve, that thing about it's still odd to go into a crowded space. I mean, I don't do it on my own bat, but hey, you got to pay the rent, right? And at the moment, that's what people are doing.
How does it work? I mean, obviously, we need to know your personal details financially,
Mm.
but if you had a gig, say 6 months ago,
Yep.
and those tickets were sold, and then you had to postpone, but people can still use their tickets, did you get that money 6 months ago? And has that now been spent? So it's almost like you're doing a gig for free, or do you get the money after the gig, no matter when it happens?
It's a good question, actually, and to be honest, I'm personally haven't been in that situation. I was doing some shows for people in January with exactly that happened, and in
Yeah.
fact, we've just been told that they were covered by the MCH, Ministry of Culture and Heritage, basically insurance scheme. So
Right.
they are getting some money back for the gigs that were cancelled. For the postponed ones, I don't know. I would assume that it would maybe depend on the ticketing agency. If people have bought a ticket, that money is out there. But whether it's been paid out by the ticketing agency to the promoters, I
Right.
actually don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, because I was thinking, imagine if you've not you personally, but if someone had like
Mm.
10 or 15 gigs to do,
Yep.
and like 12 months ago they got the money, and so now and obviously, typically we get our money, it then goes into our cost of living, and
Mm.
now you're doing all these gigs around the place and not actually getting a paycheck in your hand after doing them. I wonder how that
I will.
works.
I will tell you though, actually, Pat, I'm a little bit superstitious about that.
Right.
I won't get paid before I've done a show.
Oh, really?
Every now and again, someone will say that, they'll come up to me at the beginning of the evening, even when I first arrive, and go, "Hey, I can put the money into your account now, or I shouldn't really be saying this, but here's your cash. I'm superstitious about that. I just have a thing that don't pay me until I've done the job. Not that I think anything's going to go wrong. It's just
it's your thing.
I don't know. It's tempting fate for me.
Yeah.
It's like if you pay me in advance, something's going to go wrong, and you're going to want that money back.
It's almost like I'll put my left sock on before my right sock before I go on
Something
stage
like
every
that.
night.
Yeah. I'm not really a superstitious person, but I am on that one. Yeah.
One of the best lessons I ever learned in business from a mentor I had was spend yesterday's money. So that kind of goes without saying. So in other words, even if you've got a contracted invoice for tomorrow's money, you haven't got that yet. Even if you've been paid today, it might still not be in your bank, but yesterday's money's there. That's the money we should spend. So
no, the big one I learned very quickly is when you're registered for GST, that doesn't mean you're getting more money for your gigs. You might have an extra 15% on your invoice, but that's not yours.
So we're going to have a chat about a few things tonight. I think I had an interaction with the poltergeist today, like for real serious, like can't figure it out. So see the shelf I've got behind me, all the stuff I've got on it. It's solid as, right? It's solid as, big chunk of wood. I was working here this afternoon, and this thing, can you see the big crack in it now?
Oh yeah,
in the base.
Yeah.
I was just sitting here like this, and there was a massive, massive smash behind me. And I thought before I turned around, here you go, here's a piece of the glass that's actually been broken off it.
Yeah, wow.
I thought, I wasn't working with the camera, so I couldn't see because I can see behind me looking at the camera now. And I thought, oh, fuck, the shelf's fallen down. Turn around, everything's fine, even including, I've got little troll dolls here. They're as easy to fall over as that. Weren't falling over. Everything was fine. And this, I don't know, 1.5 kilo chunk of glass fell off, smashed on top of the bottles, glass everywhere. Honestly, I was just a bit like, what the fuck is going on here? How was this happening? It was really bizarre.
Because I was going to say, I was going to suggest we do have these thing called earthquakes, but yeah, that probably would have affected more than just that. Is this just your way of pointing out to anyone watching that you've got a glass award for something?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't going to say that.
No, fair enough. Yeah.
Honestly, though, it was this moment, and it took me like 20 minutes to kind of go, I literally can't figure it out. I thought maybe, the house vibrates upstairs sometimes. Yeah. Maybe it worked its way forward, but then that was the only thing. It was quite bizarre. So I wonder if I had a poltergeist today in the house. It's hopefully gone now. That would explain Tuesday night's show, the pile of shit that I put out to the public then as well. All right. Now, a few things to chat about tonight, but obviously the biggest news in the country at the moment, although I think a lot of people think it's also the most boring news, is the budget. So what we're going to do is go through a few things from the budget. I've had a conversation already with Julie Anne Genter, who is the finance spokesperson for the Greens. We're going to play that after we've gone through our conversation, then we'll get on with a few other bits and pieces tonight. Remember, we are live streaming. If you want to actually jump in and say g'day or share your thoughts or talk the budget or anything else we're talking about, maybe tell me about your poltergeist interaction, then whatever platform you're watching it on, if you type it out, we get it pretty much sent through to us, and then we can share it with the world as we're talking as well. So budget, and I don't know if you're a big budget guy or not, Jeremy, but I like to keep an eye on it and look what's going on, but I have to be honest, I don't go massively heavily into it. I look at the top line stuff and I try and figure out, what I need to know and why I need to know it. So there's quite a good article on stuff because it basically gives you a cheat sheet.
Yep.
And it says 4 of the key things you need to know about it. Now, obviously, this is not going to give you anything great, anything in depth, but they're already talking about being like a healthcare budget, because I think it was $13 billion going into healthcare, which to me
11 or 30, yeah,
sounds like quite a cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, how could you do a budget in this year after what we've been through over the last couple of years and not give somebody the health? I mean, I think, regardless of what you think of what's been happening and the response to what's been happening, I mean, one thing it really has shown is that we dodged a lot of bullets with our healthcare system. And, but, and this is before COVID, the restructuring that they were doing, bringing all the DHBs together. I mean, our health departments, whatever you want to say about them, the health sector needed money. And sounds like they're getting it, which I can't have a problem with.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit like we've heard from various, like the acts of this world, about health ministries in various places that have, I wouldn't say ballooned, that would be an emotive word that they will use, but that have grown over the past 3 years. And I'm like, well, if it's grown in areas because of the pandemic, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
And so
of
more
course.
money needs to be driven into those places because, don't want to freak anyone out here, but we're still in a global pandemic as we speak.
Yeah.
It seems to have made sense. So
And
yeah, sorry, you go.
well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think some of the costs, totally understandably, have been directly because of the pandemic. But also, I mean, the pandemic has, not just us, but around the world, has shown where there are some holes in healthcare systems. When you realize that if a couple of members of an ER department go down and can't work, and suddenly you're short-staffed, massively
Yeah,
short-staffed,
yeah.
then that points to other problems. And if it took a pandemic to find that out, well, that's unfortunately, maybe that's one of the lessons we're going to learn out of it.
Well, I hope maybe just at the end of it, if there are lessons to be learned, they do then stay being learned, if you know what I mean. Because so often you go through these, and I don't want to bring up horrible events, but you go through a horrible event and the whole country finds a new gear. And then whether it's one of empathy or whether it's one of fixing a gap in the system or whatever, and then it doesn't take very long to go back to what it was before whatever that event was.
Yeah,
So if
absolutely.
they do find these holes, I hope they plug them and then they stay well plugged, not just 5 years beyond it, we're back to having those holes back again, so to speak.
Yep, I agree.
So one of the announcements, and I don't know how I mean, it's not that I feel bad about this, but and we talked to Julie Anne Genter. I talked to Julie Anne Genter, and the conversation I had with her, which we're going to play later, I say one of the things that me and George have been talking about in this show is meaningful differences. And I feel like the government has a couple of responsibilities, any government, and that's obviously to look after the citizens, to run the country, to kind of be the guardians of our money that we pay in taxes. And if they're going to make a change or make a difference, I want it to be a meaningful change and a meaningful difference. And like, not to preempt the conversation, because I've said this before, but the $10 tax cut per person, which takes $1 billion out of the tax coffers, $10 tax cut is not really a meaningful difference for anybody. So even though someone can go, well, we're giving more of the money back to the public, it's $617 a year. Actually, it's not meaningful enough of a difference to make an impact in probably 99.99% of people. But that $1 billion in the coffers, in the government money, could make a meaningful difference.
Yeah.
So my only question about this, it's a $350 payment, which is great. It's just like a stimulus check that went around America when Biden came in and Trump did one as well. But is that, I mean, it's a one-off, it's a hit, it's great, but it's not going to be given to those people who are most vulnerable. This is like the middle group, the middle class, as the Nats are saying, the squeezed middle, which is, I'm going to make a drinking game with some of these things. That's going to be a square that you're going to consume when you hear the squeezed middle. Because if you've got the winter subsidy, you're not eligible for this.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but I mean, what do you think? $350, one payment, obviously lovely, fun. It's probably 2.5, 3 tanks of gas. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm with you. Whether it makes a meaningful difference, I mean, I think it's a smart announcement politically. It dodges a whole bunch of things that have been flying around, because it is going to the middle class, the squeezed middle class, if you like. It's not going to the uber wealthy, or even the moderately wealthy, actually. And it's not a new benefit. It's not it doesn't replace anything. Like, if you're already receiving the winter subsidy, like you say, this doesn't add on to that.
Yeah.
So politically, I think it makes sense. Yeah, $350 a year. For some people, sure, that might make $17 a week might make a difference to their grocery bill or their public transport bill or whatever. It doesn't make a dent in a tank of gas these days. So yeah, I mean, but again, I mean, I'm trying to look. I did read something about the total cost of it, and there's a lot of things actually in the budget today that that are sort of interesting in that, because I just want to work out if it's in the.
I can't see the total cost.
I can't see it right there, but actually, where we were just before, like for example, the extending the fuel tax cut and the public transport subsidy. If you look at the numbers involved there, it's going to cost 235 million. Public transport discount will cost 132 million. Now, those numbers sound big when you first read them, $235 million. But if you look at it in the context of a budget and of our national budget, they're not huge numbers.
No. 128 billion, I think, was the total budget.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you're looking at, well, depends how many zeros I put in a billion, whether I can get the percentages right. But it's not a huge amount of money. I mean, we've just been talking about $11 billion to the health industry. You're
yeah.
looking at this combined between these two things, roughly, 367 million.
$1 billion is not even 1%.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah.
So there you go.
I
And
think this is a bit misleading though, I think, as well, because when they say the petrol tax cuts costs around 235 million, it doesn't cost anything. They might lose 235 million, but it's not a cost, it's a loss of
it's not a
revenue.
cost. It's a loss of
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And see, this is my issue with budget day, I think, is it doesn't matter what any government announces. People are going to jump on it immediately. The opposition is going to jump on it. Either they've spent too much or they're not spending enough, depending on the area they're talking about. And things like this, things like, oh, it costs this amount of money. No, it's a revenue decrease. It's not, we're not taking money out of something else.
Yeah.
We're just not making that money for the next 2 months through to
Yeah.
August. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, to go back to the $350 payment, yeah, I sort of see what you mean.
I mean, it's nice.
Is it a
Don't get me
meaningful
wrong.
It's nice. Yeah, it's nice. It's not doing any harm, I guess,
Yeah.
is my question. And again, politically, we do have an election coming up, just over a year, and this is a nice little, little free taster, little lolly that
Yeah.
they throw out at the
Yeah.
beginning of the game. Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, the other big there was four things. I think that was the second thing was the fuel tax and public transport. It's all been extended by a couple of months. They're in a situation though. It's a little bit like I remember when I was a student. Like no government beyond the interest-free student loans wants to then put it on because they don't want to be the government seen to be costing even more. The same for the working for families. No government wants to cancel that, even though it's not a national policy. They should rally against it in theory. And I feel a bit the same about the fuel tax cut, because as soon as that goes back on, it's going to be awful for, I guess, the Labor government, because it should be back on in the next few months, and it's going to feel like a new tax, even though it's just a replacement of tax. So I think they're on a bit of a hiding there, which makes me think they'll get it back on sooner rather than later, because they won't be wanting to do that 3 or 4 months out from an election.
Yeah, I guess
to do that as far away as possible.
I guess they're hopefully, they're gambling on the idea that petrol prices will come down so that maybe it'll balance out. I personally don't see that happening in the next couple of months. Those things move slowly.
Yep, $13.2 billion to health spending, which we've kind of talked a bit about. And also Treasury says wage growth will overtake inflation from the start of next year. So, I mean, for those people who are getting that kind of income, wage, then they're saying it's going to be a bit better for next year. I thought I'd go a little bit into the health so people knew, because that seems to be the big thing. Kim says here on the conversation, I hope the increases in health don't just get sucked into establishing the new health authority. Well,
quite a few of them are actually. Yeah. So carry on. Yep.
I'll give you some details. So I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just go through health thing. It seems to be the big thing from this budget. 11.1 billion over 4 years on the new health reforms. Health NZ, 1.8 billion in the first year will be to clear the existing DHB debt. From 2024, the new health system moves to a 3-year funding cycle. 1.3 billion in capital expenditure for redevelopments in Nelson, Whangarei, Hill Morton hospitals. 168 million over 4 years for direct commissioning by the new Māori Health Authority. 191 million extra spending over the next 2 years for Pharmac. 166, I guess that's million, there's no M there though, over 4 years for ambulance services. Great. 90.7 million over 4 years for air ambulance. 76 million over 4 years for training and primary care specialists, including nursing, physiotherapists, pharmacists, optical surgeons, Māori Health, workforce development. 102 million for community healthcare. 86 million over 4 years for GP in high need areas, and 100 million for mental health and addiction services. So if people want to know more about it, that's on Today FM. You can probably go look that up and get the details all for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the big one there that does leap out is paying off the existing debts of DHBs. And again, I mean, I think that's the 1.3 billion, 1.8 billion, that first section there. I mean, again, I think that's one of the things that we are playing catch up with our health system. So many of those other things are great. The spending on ambulance, the spending on mental health systems, the spending on more training, they're all fantastic. But, when you're starting from a point where existing DHB owes $1.8 billion, then I mean there's a chunk out of it. I mean, not an enormous chunk, not even 10%. But it's yeah, we're going to be playing catch up for a little while. I think this is a step in the right direction.
But also, it's that idea. I mean, I think, how do people get a chunk of money? I don't know. Let's say you sold a business, or you got an inheritance, or you won an amount on a lotto scratchy or something. One of the first things you might do to help you live better and be better is pay off your mortgage.
Of course.
I mean, and that's so you get rid of debt. Now,
Yep.
I'm not saying. I mean, there is a conversation to now have. Not that you and I are going to have it. Why were they in debt? But that's a positive positioning to actually help things operate. If you don't have to pay off debt, if you haven't got interest to pay on that debt, then you've actually got every dollar you earn. You're not sucking 20 cents out to pay off a debt. You can use that into the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't think for a second that I'm saying it's a bad thing.
No, I wasn't
absolutely
suggesting
not. I'm just saying that, when people do start delving into these numbers, which is what people are going to be doing ad nauseum for the next week at least, that is going to be one that keeps coming up, that of that 13 billion, 1.8 is going to this. Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, Pat. It has to. Of course you would pay off your mortgage. Of course, if I came into a little bit of money, I'd pay off my credit card, would be the first thing I do, so that I'm not paying that every month. And that's exactly what's happening here as well.
Yeah. So of course, the big credit card, 1.8 billion. I wonder what.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
it's probably one of those Amex Blacks. You can put as much one on as you want.
Well, I bought Twitter with it, so does that count?
Okay, so then you had the regular the pushback from various peoples. I don't have any audio or video on this, but I can read a little bit about Christopher Luxon came out with his 3-point plan on how to address the wrongs in the quote unquote backwards budget. What Christopher Luxon said is you don't pile up costs on businesses that they pass through with higher prices. Luxon says you undo things like the landlord taxes, and you don't do national insurance schemes. They just add cost, not improve the productivity of business. The second thing is you remove the bottlenecks that are constraining growth in the country at the moment. And a lot of that is around immigration settings. Businesses can't grow productively. Immigrants are the lifeblood of business. I guess he'll never be able to work with Winston Peters, will he? That's how we get people with higher wages and salaries. Thirdly, you have to go through all this expenditure. You can't tell me that in the 127 billion in expenditure that's already going on, that there isn't wastage. We know there is. That was his kind of 3 points of comeback. Yours, Jeremy.
Interesting. It's kind of, those 3 points are sort of interesting to me. The first one, of course, he's going to mention business in the first sentence. He's the leader of the National Party. That's his job. So that one, of course, makes sense. Interesting that he brings up immigration so prominently. Always a bit of a hot button topic. I'm kind of, because I happen to agree with that to a certain degree. I think our immigration settings do need looked at, but to hear it from the leader of a centre right party is refreshing. Actually,
do you know what it means, Jeremy? It means he's too woke. Now, I have people don't know this yet, but I've done a podcast with Sean Plunkett that's being released tomorrow morning on the same YouTube channel. You can see down the bottom. It's a different product, but it's on the same platform. And he told me that he thought that Mr. Luxon was a little bit too woke. So that's what it is. Yeah. Mr. Luxon's too woke.
He's been accused of a lot of things. That's a new one. The interesting one for me is the third one. And I realize that this is a talking point right off the back of the budget. But, he points out, I mean, it's so vague. It's you can't tell me that there isn't wastage in this 127 billion. But he doesn't point to anything specifically. Now, to be fair, I don't know when that interview took place, but I'm assuming it was pretty much immediately after the budget. And he hadn't had time to go through. But I think that's interesting, is that there isn't, from my very limited reading of today, and it really is limited. I'm one of these people. I'm a bit like you. I go for those cheat sheet articles that really helps me with a budget. But there doesn't seem to be anything that leaps out as me as being massively controversial in here. There's nothing that an opposition party or person can point to immediately and go, wait a minute, why are we spending that? And we've had those in the past. We've had it with spending on, whether it be defense or lack of spending on, it's often lack of spending actually, rather than the amount being spent. So not enough spending going towards the police, for example, is one that came up a few years ago. So it's I know it's a huge budget. It's our biggest ever. There's a lot of new spending in there, but it seems to me on initial read to be reasonably safe budget. The numbers might be big, but the ideas behind it don't seem to be groundbreaking or earth-shattering is probably a better way of putting it.
I think you've set us up quite nicely for the next bit, though, as well. Right. Because the other response I wanted to look at very quickly is David Seymour. David, and actually about, because I have a clip to play. It's not from the budget, it's from a few weeks ago, where Jack Tame and Christopher Luxon do talk about what he'd cut, like where is the wastage. So we're going to get to that in a minute, and that'll be a bit of an example as to what we say. Not too many spoilers, but he kind of struggled. So we'll get on to that in a minute. So David Seymour accused Grant Robertson of putting half the country on welfare. Unfortunately, people who rely on working for a living are no better off. And unfortunately, somewhere called Australia just got a whole lot more attractive. There's actually, I thought, credit where credit's due. Someone, I think it might have been Christopher Luxon. He said $350, just enough to get a one-way flight to Australia. Well, it's quite a good zinger. I mean, love him or hate him, it's not a bad line. Good line. Give him credit.
Yep.
There's a failure to give hope.
Good heckle. Yep.
That we have a real strategy to end the cost of living crisis. The ACT Party leader hit back when asked if Robertson had at least in part addressed that crisis. For everyone earning over $70,000, all you get is additional tax to pay for all your additional expenditure that is going on. But he saved the harshest comments when asked what ACT would do to address the crisis. Here's something I want to address as we go through the next few minutes. Seymour said to his party, Seymour said his party would curtail Labour spending and cut back initially by $6 billion. The more government spends, the higher inflation we have. The higher the Reserve Bank is going to raise interest rates. Now, one of the things I want to spin this conversation into is that is horse shit, right? And it's not just coming from, your thicko mate Pat from the bottom of the South Island. Here is right after the budget, a very high profile, very well respected economist talking about David Seymour's comments that I just read out as being economically illiterate. Have a quick listen to this.
Back to our panel now, who I could see shaking their heads. Shawn Mobile, Dita, I'm going to come to you first, Shawn Mobile. A lot of shaking of your head during David Seymour's interview.
It just made me angry. It's just so economically illiterate, right? It's like, it's not government spending that is driving inflation. We literally had the UK print 9% inflation yesterday because there is a global inflation crisis. Now, yes, we should talk about inflation. Yes, we should talk about government, but you can't just tell lies about what's going on in the economy. So, this whole thing that apparently it's wasteful government spending that's creating inflation is simply not true. You can say that there's parts of this spending that we don't like,
yes,
and we won't do that because that doesn't add value, is not efficient, is not consistent with ideology. That's all fine. But let's not do it on the basis of, I think, what are completely wrong things to say. So
pretty unequivocal there in that statement. I'm just going to try and turn all this off and get to my next thing. So it's also something we've been hearing from Christopher Luxon, right? Christopher Luxon has been saying a lot about, they've got a spending problem as it's driving inflation. Here's that conversation I was talking about from a few weeks ago with Jack Tame. Now, in this part of the conversation, Jack Tame, he's already asked the question once, be specific, Mr. Luxon. Be specific. What spending can you point to where the government that is causing inflation? What government spending can you point to? I've cut out the first part of the conversation because he doesn't answer it to start with. And then Jack Tame asks the question again.
Specifically, what government spending that your party opposed has led to that inflation?
Well, look, I think the reality is this. The government is spending $128 billion in government spending. It is up over $52 billion from 2017. So a massive increase in government spending.
So what have you opposed?
So what I would say to you is that the role is to go through all of that existing $100 billion plus of spending line by line and identify the wasteful spending that's going on.
You and your party have said that government spending to this point has caused inflation. I'm asking you for specific examples.
Let me give you some examples.
Great.
So $100 million on a slow train from Hamilton.
Okay, let's break that down.
Higher emissions.
Now, this is very good what Jack Tame does. It's kind of what you just did before, Jeremy. So you and Jack are in good stead here. $100 million to me and you and to people watching is like, fuck me. I mean, that's like, I don't know, Shaquille O'Neal money or, Taylor Swift or whatever. That would be the will. But out of $128 billion, 100 million isn't even 1/10 of 1%. And
right.
we started this conversation by talking about what me and George is sick at home at the moment, but the guy who produces the show, have been talking about is meaningful difference. And I talk about that with Julie Anne Genter. I want to see governments make meaningful difference. Now, if you can point to 0.5% of spending and that's got to stop, that's not, okay, first of all, government spending doesn't lead to inflation. But even if it did 1% of government spending, and you're not even necessarily saying cutting it all, because you might just pull back 30% of that spending, is not going to be the solution. I'm actually not going to play all of this because I've pretty much just surmised what goes on.
Well,
that continues. So if we just hold it to
so
another
$100 million,
30 seconds.
You just said $128 billion is Crown core expenditure for the year. So $100 million represents 0.07% of government.
Let me give you some more. $1.8 billion on.
Now, we won't keep going with this because I could go for another minute and a half, but they basically get to about 2%.
Right.
About 2% of the budget. Yes, Jeremy, you were going to jump in.
Well, only to say that it's interesting. I've heard about this interview. I actually haven't seen it, but interestingly enough, I said before that Luxon's response today, maybe he hadn't had time to properly look at the budget, but actually he parrots the same line weeks ago, which is we need to go through this spending. There's going to be wastage. Well, that's fine to say that, but like Jack is trying to do in this interview, where is it? What is it? And the same with Seymour's comments today. I mean, with the exception of throwing in the number 70,000, which is the cutoff point for the $350 payment, by the way, apart from that, any of those statements could have been written any time in the last 3 weeks from David Seymour. They're basically Act 101. You know, him coming out and saying, you're putting everyone on welfare. Everyone's going to go to Australia. We would cut the difference. This is we would cut $6 billion, which actually roughly correlates to the extra spending, which is in this budget. Yeah. So if you think about it in terms of ACT policy, what he's saying is we would cap government spending. We wouldn't spend any more money, which is kind of their fundamental belief as a party. It's not specific. It's not, again, he's not saying which $6 billion are you going to cut. Why would you cut it? It's talking points. It's talking points with you're talking about meaningful action. This is not meaningful discourse. This is throwing your slogans at a wall and seeing what sticks. And unfortunately, we have the same conversation every year on budget day. You know, you hear the same conversation. And it actually doesn't matter who's in government. You know, this isn't I'm not saying that national acts are unusual here. If this was a national government, Labor people would be saying the same thing, you know, too much spending or cutting taxes for the rich, et cetera, et cetera. To go back to your point, you're right. If you're talking about, even if Jack goes into depth and you're still getting to only 2% of the budget, what you're actually saying there is 98% of it's okay. You can't find fault with it. I'd take those odds. You know?
Yeah. Now look, and the other thing is, so what we've said, what we've said is that National is saying that government spending is causing inflation. It's not. Yeah. That's not what the result. But even if it was, they can't identify what spending would change inflation. And then on top of that, also in that interview, and this is probably something you've heard, I couldn't find video for it, but from the same story I have a quote for it. When asked about what Mr. Luxon would do with National under a national government, Jack Tame got him to say actually what they were going to do would cause the same amount of inflation. So this is what it says. Luxon said his tax cuts are different because, quote, Grant Robertson is about to give himself $6 billion, the biggest increase in the budget is in the history of New Zealand, and all that is going to be inflationary. Our tax cuts come out of that. They're about $1.7 billion. We think it would be a good idea to do these inflation adjustment tax thresholds. It's no more inflationary than Grant Robinson's $6 billion. Jack Tame says, so it's the same. It's still inflation. And Mr. Luxon replies, it's exactly the same. So even when he can't point to the spending that would do it, but that's because spending doesn't do inflation. And when his results would keep inflation the same. Now, just finally on this, not to beat a dead horse, which might be too late, I just wanted to play, and it's only 55 seconds, an economist, this is actually from April, so it's a wee while ago, because this was all about when inflation started. And this economist was talking about what causes and what drives inflation. Because what I want to do, and I say this over and over again, is lead a horse to water. I want you, Jeremy, I want you watching to be informed as to what the truth is, not what any politician, don't give a fuck who it is, whether it's left, right, or middle, tells you is the situation. So here is an expert telling us what drives inflation.
Oh, pretty clearly the ultimate responsibility rests with the Reserve Bank. They're given an inflation target by the government. They're given independent powers to adjust monetary policy. And poor inflation outcomes, particularly trend inflation, the persistent bits of it, are only the Reserve Bank's responsibility. Whatever the government does in terms of increasing spending or cutting taxes, there are all sorts of things the Reserve Bank has to take into account when it makes its interest rate decisions. And it's quite clear that they and a lot of other people badly misforecast where things were going a year or so ago and had policy in the wrong place. And then when they finally realised that they needed to be raising interest rates in the middle of last year, they were pretty slow to adjust. The responsibility rests with them. Now, they can't control oil prices, short-term fluctuations there. But what they'll be focusing on and what they should be focusing on is that when they strip out those one-off influences and see that core inflation is now running well above the bank's 1% to 3% target.
So there you go. So and look, it's not the cover-all completely, but it's pretty clear, according to that economist and others, that government spending is not the driver of inflation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're not Argentina in the late 70s. It's not like we're just printing money. And that's what, makes a loaf of bread suddenly worth several $1,000s. Interesting point that he makes there, which is because I am one of, I'm sure many people who look at the one-off events, as he calls them, the rise in oil prices, the war in Ukraine, the pandemic. But interesting, the point that he makes is that the underlying inflation is running ahead of predictions and of policy. And again, that's not so much to do with the government of the day. It's to do with underlying Reserve Bank policy as well. And
one of the big ironies he says later in that conversation, people can find it for themselves if they want it, is one of the mistakes the Reserve Bank made was they were predicting there'd be more unemployed people than there are. So on some level, I'm not saying again it's the coverall, but on some level, because we have a better economy than the Reserve Bank predicted, it's part of the driving factor behind where the inflation is. He also talks in that interview about the Reserve Bank changes take, I think he says 9 to 12 or 6 to 9 months to actually impact society. So these were decisions that were made 6 to 9 months ago, and the decisions they're making today will impact us in 6 to 9 months from now. So, I mean, I guess ultimately it's a little bit like if you've got a boss and one of your employees, does something bad, you might have to take ultimate responsibility. So maybe the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister might need to take some ultimate responsibility because they're kind of the bosses, but there's actually very little they can do about inflation. And I want us to know that and understand that, not to say that you should therefore give them a pass on lots of areas, but just not believe the bullshit coming from the other side, especially when they go, if it is government spending, how can you fix it? No answer. So with changes you're going to do, we'll do exactly the same inflation. Yes. So that's the game.
Yeah, I like to think of it as, an economy is like steering an oil tanker or an aircraft carrier. You can't turn the wheel and suddenly the whole thing moves. It takes a long time to move things. I mean, 6 to 9 months is actually not that long a time in the overall scheme, but people are often looking for the fix that's going to work tomorrow. And the same thing with the fraction of the budget that people like Luxon and Seymour are talking about is turning a steering wheel that much and expecting everything to shift with it. That much isn't going to make a huge difference.
Okay, so what we're going to do now, Jeremy, because I've got that conversation with Julie Anne Genter that's pre-recorded. I'm going to pause the conversation on budgetary stuff here. The conversation I have with Julie Anne is about the Greens' response to the budget, because what I thought we'd do is let's go into the other two where they're a bit more lighthearted, they're a bit more pop culture-y, and then at the end of the show I'll play Julie Anne, and then you can fuck off. You don't have to hang around. You can go off and head off early. Plan?
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right, mate. And even these two things, the first one, there's not really that much, I guess, to talk about, although we've kind of referenced it. It's just fascinating that we've got sort of our first live, interactive television show, maybe not the first because we probably had one just on previously, but we have not very far into it. And Eric Murray's down with COVID. Now I saw today, look, let me say, I'm not necessarily a fan. I haven't seen Dancing with the Stars. I don't know what's going on there, but I know enough about it because they're in the headlines that now 2 of the remaining people are out with COVID. I don't really know what else to say about that other than to say, fuck. And then but maybe it's more, and maybe you can speak to this, Jeremy, how is entertainment even going to work, live entertainment, because that's what this is, albeit on television, when this is still floating around, and it seems, if you literally cough the wrong way, or if you look the wrong way, someone within that group is going to have COVID.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, this is actually how I found out that my friend and colleague Reese Mathewson has COVID. I did not know. Remind me, I must message him after this interview, because I don't watch the show, but I do know a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. And interesting in this article that you've got up there, partway down, Reese references the fact that they've changed as the show has gone along. They've changed some of the testing, like I think somewhere, there we go. The COVID-19 protocols put in place by producers have tightened over the course of the show, Mathewson said. That includes rat testing the live audiences on entry. Now, most of the only live show that I've been involved in has been 7 Days recently, and they've been doing that since the beginning of the season. Every audience member, every crew member, every cast member is rat tested at the door before you're allowed into the building. Time you go. If and I don't know this, but if Dancing with the Stars haven't been doing that, then that's a problem.
They could be a super spreader event, literally.
Well, they could be. Yeah. Now, I don't know that sentence doesn't make it clear whether the rat testing's been there from the beginning or not. I kind of assume it has because, like I say, every TV production that I've been part of has been really careful. They've done everything within their power, I believe, to keep people safe. But this virus is devious. It's you can't do Dancing with the Stars wearing a mask. You just can't do it. And they didn't do it for 2 years. That the show was postponed. They didn't do 21. They didn't do 2020 because they knew they couldn't do it. The fact that it snuck through and we've got this, well, yeah, I mean, that just, again, it's just yet another reminder, if we still need one, that this pandemic is far from over,
Hey, well, there's two things, yeah. The first is, I'm getting back on with quote unquote the new normal life. I had someone come over into my studio the other day, and I said to them, yeah, come on into the studio. It's rat or face mask, you pick. And they chose to take a rat, and then we hung out in the studio, and I took a rat as well. And that was it. The second thing though is, how about a wake up call? Remember when? And I know that Omicron's not exactly like COVID Mark 1. It sounds like a Zephyr, doesn't it? A Cortina. But how careful people were. Like TVNZ had two news teams. They had two news teams that rotated, and that therefore meant if COVID broke out in one of the news teams, they'd have another. The protocols they put back in place when it was first out were severe enough to keep everyone safe. I didn't hear of anyone, I don't think, on any of those major networks that sort of got it. I wonder, and I hope maybe this is a wake-up call to the entertainment industry that, you know what, guys, this is still here. Maybe you, whoever the you is in that situation, is let your guard down, and if you do, this is what's going to happen. We have Penny Ashton on quite a lot, maybe at least once a week on average, and she's got a tour coming up, and so she's doing everything she can at the moment to keep herself safe, because she doesn't want to get COVID, so she can do her shows. And she's lucky, I guess, that she's a one-person show, whereas this is reliant on a big crew and stuff. But still, I think she's putting in protocols so that she can do what she needs to do. It seems like potentially this group hasn't. I'm going to be careful because we don't know, but certainly compared to what it was, protocols are lessened. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I want to be really careful here because, like I say, my personal experience is that the TV and film industry has taken really in-depth measures. They've taken the virus very seriously, and I can only assume that this is not an outlier. But the fact that, I mean, the truth is, you can take a rat and test negative and then test positive 24 hours later.
Sure. 2 hours later.
2 hours later, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different with, talking about Patty, but also with the stuff I'm doing. It's a bit different with live performance because, the big difference between TV performance and live performance is if no one comes to my shows, I don't get paid.
Yeah.
You can do, 7 Days, for example, ran pretty much for close to 2 years without a live audience at all,
right?
With social distancing, with perspex screens between the panelists on the TV, Of course, it changes the vibe, it changes the atmosphere, both for the performers and for people watching at home. But having a live audience is a choice that you make. I do believe you could do something like Dancing with the Stars without a live audience, or you could choose not to do it. Or in this case, you know, maybe it's just you just got unlucky, and that's where I'm sitting with it at the moment. But yeah, going forward, it's it's going to be it's going to be a total balancing act for entertainment, both screen and live, for the foreseeable future. I mean, we're seeing festivals starting to get up and running around the world. A lot of the festivals here cancelled, but we will see festivals coming up, certainly this coming summer. And you can kind of expect that outbreaks will happen, that these things will happen.
And the thing about the rats as well, and I mean, if you think about this logically, there will be a 60-second differential at some stage during positive and negative. You know, it literally would, because you have to be positive at some stage. That means 60 seconds before you were positive, you would have tested negative. But so all a rat really does is tells you what I am right now, right? Exactly. Right in this moment, not in 10 minutes from now, but it's all we've got.
Exactly.
So what I'm about is using the tools we've got to make sensible decisions when there is no guarantees.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to, I mean, I am absolutely giving everyone involved with Dancing with the Stars, firstly, my thoughts and prayers. God, nearly went there. But I am absolutely giving them the benefit of all of my experience and what I know about the people who work on these shows, that this is just this just got through. You know, this is one of these, like you say, we've got all the tools that we have and we use them.
Slip past the goalie.
But they're not bulletproof. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know, even the top footballers score an own goal every now and again.
All righty. Hey, I want to talk about this. This is a few days old. Haven't really talked about it. But again, often I throw things in that are comedian related when you're with us, Jeremy, stand-up comedian especially, because I think this story sort of was generated by the last Chappelle special on Netflix. When there was protests about it, and when the employees of Netflix, well, I should say some, I don't actually know whether it was 1% or 80%, but there was employees within Netflix who were protesting outside Netflix because they were upset about the Chappelle special. Netflix isn't doing so well. It's not that it's not doing so well. It's lost, what was it, 200,000 subscribers or something. To me, I kind of go, you've got whatever it is, 220 million subscribers. 200,000 doesn't sound like a lot.
It's like the budget again, isn't it? Right? It's a percentage. Yeah.
But the thing they're saying about it is they've never grown smaller. So for them, it's a big deal. And also, I also think, though, I imagine during COVID, there would have been a lot more uptake of Netflix. So I would imagine, because people were stuck at home, I would imagine a correction would be natural. But it seems to be a lot of people talking about it not doing as well. It's affected in the stock price. I think they lost 200,000 subscribers out of 220 million. I think their stock price dropped by 25%, which seems a bit disproportionate to me, but that's what happened.
Well, there were predictions they were going to lose another couple of million. Now, I'm not sure how much of that has come true, but I think it's those predictions that drove the stock rather than, that 200,000. But anyway,
what has happened is the company has come out with sort of a new. In fact, they've probably got a lot. It's new guidelines, new employment guidelines. They've restructured its culture guidelines, including an artistic expression section, warning employees about the possibility of working on movies and shows that might go against their values. So I don't know. I'm sure you can't kind of crowbar this into someone's contract already, but maybe it's more about the culture at Netflix. What they've said this is a quote: "Not everyone will like or agree with everything on our service. We let viewers decide what's appropriate for them versus having Netflix censor specific artists or voices," the guideline reads. "If you find it hard to support our content breadth, Netflix may not be the best place for you." So on some level, they're kind of saying, if you don't like it, fuck off. If you don't like what we're doing and you can't handle it, don't work here. But we don't want to hear about it. My overly, I guess, aggressive paraphrase, but it's come out also not long after Elon Musk has started talking about free speech and the wrong speech and everyone's speech and I just wonder if Netflix is trying to kind of go, we're on a little bit of a downward trajectory. Maybe we should jump on that bandwagon as well. What do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It's interesting that they felt they had to put this into a contract because I think, again, working in the entertainment industry, that is a choice that you will have to make at some point. Um, as a when I was sort of starting out as an actor, every now and again you get an audition for to do an ad for a company that you might not agree with, or a product that you don't agree with.
Yeah.
Particularly back in the day when I mean, one example is cigarette advertising, or alcohol advertising these days, and that's a decision you have to make, but it is the decision that you make as a freelancer. You make that decision on your own. You're not actually working. It's not part of a company contract.
Yeah.
You have that choice on a case by case basis most of the time, and the same would go for most crew. If you're a lighting designer or a camera operator, you have that choice on a case by case basis. It's a little bit different when you're working for a company like Netflix, which makes all of these things in house. Like for a Dave Chappelle special, it's produced in-house. The camera people are employed by Netflix. Everyone's employed by Netflix. They're not employed by Dave Chappelle.
Are you sure about that? Because I know I've seen an interview with him. Let me say this. I've seen an interview with him where he was off in the wilderness after going to Africa and coming back after he quit his show. And I've seen an interview with him, and he obviously tells it in a very funny way, but he talks about he had 3 specials in the can. He signed a special with Netflix, and he went zzz, and he handed in the 3 specials. So there's certainly been some of those specials which he did himself. I don't know of all of them, though.
I think, yeah, again, no, I mean, I don't take this as gospel, but I do believe that it sort of depends. Yeah, originally with Netflix is they would air people's specials that had been already recorded.
Yeah.
And I have friends and colleagues who have done that with them. More recently, they have gone into, they are producing not just comedy specials. They're producing their own movies. They're producing their own TV shows. Huge amount. I mean, and the amount of money involved is just astronomical.
Well, they take in about $2 billion a month.
Yeah, that's right. And, compared to what the big players or the traditional big players, someone like Universal or Warner Brothers or Sony or 20th Century spend annually, I mean, Netflix spends that on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that they felt that they had to put this into a contract. And then also that the fact that, they've gone public with this. Because this is employment law, there's no reason they would ever have to actually reveal this to somebody. And they've chosen to do so to the journal. So are they jumping on a bandwagon? Maybe. I think more they're just sort of covering themselves. That free speech bandwagon is very attractive to some people without a lot of thought going into it.
I do think as well, though. I mean, not to sound like the capitalist in the room, but if I'm working for a company and I don't like the direction of the company, I leave the company. And like Netflix is not a niche market, and it's not making content for these people alone who don't like the other content.
Yeah,
it's a broad church that makes all sorts of stuff. I struggle to think that anyone getting into working for Netflix would have gone, like if you didn't like swearing, they've got movies with swear words in it. I mean, everyone saw 13 Reasons, the most horrific suicide scene there's ever been. Like, no, you know what I mean? It's like, I kind of do think when you go into a situation and maybe some things change, like your culture changes, it might be, but this is a production house that makes dozens and dozens and dozens of different pieces of content every year for dozens of different genres, with everything from light and fluffy kids entertainment to dark offensive comedy. It's like, if you didn't know what you're getting into, then maybe you shouldn't be working there either, because you're a fucking moron.
I think again, it goes back to what sort of surprises me about that is that they felt that they have to put this into a contract. Now, I mean, if I want to play devil's advocate here too, it does show that, there is a new culture that thinks you have the right to protest everything that you don't agree with, even if you work for that company. I mean, this is almost like these people coming out and protesting about content on Netflix is like somebody who used to work for a tobacco company suddenly going out going, hang on, we sell cigarettes? No one told me. No one told me that when I signed up. So yeah, I mean, I don't really have that massive an opinion on it, but it's interesting to me that they've actually felt that they've had to put this in writing, because, like I say, there's always been a sort of doesn't matter what business you're in, absolutely, but to speak specifically from the entertainment world, yeah, there is an expectation that every now and again you will find yourself having to make a choice about whether am I going to do that job for those people? Am I going to promote that product? Am I going to do a particular scene in a movie? I mean, we do have nudity clauses in every TV contract, by the way, because that's a choice that you have to make at some point. Not me personally, no one's asked, but yeah. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear the reasoning behind actually putting it in writing is interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's also the other thing, as you said, and it's gone public. I don't actually know if Netflix made it public. It could have been coming.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, I just read briefly in that article you had on screen that Netflix, they revealed this in an interview with the spokesperson to the Wall Street Journal. So
let me also say, and this is I've only just brought this up, so I don't have it queued up. There's a very interesting post on YouTube called Simon Sinek on millennials in the workplace, and one of the things he talks about with millennials in the workplace, and I'm not saying it's millennials at Netflix who are doing this.
What's the millennial question?
But you do kind of assume it is
a generation.
Yeah,
group of people
but
who were born approximately.
One of the big things he talks about.
They can have anything they want.
Here we go. This is the millennials in the workplace.
What I've learned is that I can break it down into 4 pieces. Right? There are four things, 4 characteristics. One is parenting, the other one is technology, the third is impatience, and the fourth is environment. The generation that we call the millennials, too many of them grew up subject to, not my words, failed parenting strategies, where, for example, they were told that they were special all the time. They were told that they could have anything they want in life, just because they want it, right? They were told, some of them got into honors classes, not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some of them got A's, not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. Some kids got participation medals. You got a medal for coming in last, right? Which the science we know is pretty clear, which is it devalues the medal and the reward for those who actually work hard. And it actually makes the person who comes in last feel embarrassed because they know they didn't deserve it. So it actually makes them feel worse, right? So you take this group of people and they graduate school and they get a job, and they're thrust into the real world, and in an instant, they find out they're not special, their moms can't get them a promotion, that you get nothing for coming in last, and by the way, you can't just have it because you want it, right? And in an instant, their entire self-image is shattered. And so you have an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations.
It goes on. I mean, like, even I felt there's a few times when he talks, you kind of go, it's a bit uncomfortable, but it's really, and he cites the science and he cites the research. It's a really interesting conversation. One of the things he says is a millennial will be in a workplace and they'll be working away, they'll be having, and then they'll quit and they'll be like, I just don't feel like I'm making enough of a difference. And that's their yardstick for needing to go to another job. Not, I need to spend 3 years grinding to learn what I need to know to go on to something else to make a difference. They're like, they quit a job after 6 months because I'm just not making a difference. And when I heard the thing about Netflix, I thought about his little conversation.
Yeah,
so anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, we can wrap, bro, because I'm going to go on and show this thing. I mean, you're welcome to stay around if you want, but it's a 10-minute conversation with Julie Anne Genter, the Greens response to the. It's also already on YouTube, so if you did want to see it, you just watch it on YouTube. It's the Greens response to the budget, what they have to say, and I'll just play that, and I'm assuming you want to shoot off. You shoot off. I'll say.
I will. Yeah, I'll leave you to it. I'll have a look, and but thanks for having me back on, and yeah. It's interesting to be doing this in the dark rather than midday.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Like I'm using the dog. The dog's down. I don't have the camera on, so I can't show you, but the dog's down in the sleep in her bed. And last night, me and Chewie were going for it, and I looked over, and we got to about 11:15, when I looked over, and the dog had left, and I went, "Oh, Chewie, once the dog's taken herself to bed upstairs, it's time to wrap."
Yeah,
it's time to wrap. But for you right now, it's time to wrap. I'll play this 10-minute conversation, then I'll wrap by myself at the end, and maybe we'll see you next week. We'll see how it all goes.
Yeah, well, indeed. All right, take care.
All right, Jeremy. Thank you, sir. Jeremy Elwood. Moving on there, and for the rest of us, I'll give you a chance to check out this conversation that I had with Julie Anne Genter earlier this afternoon. It was about 6:30, I think, actually, when I had the conversation. So it's quite fresh after the budget. But I wanted to know what the Greens' response to the budget was. Here is Julie Anne Genter. finance spokesperson for the Greens is Julie Anne Genter. Julie Anne, thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
I nearly said friend of the show, but I don't think you've been on this one before. You've been on other stuff we've done, so I'll just say friend. No, I won't be that formal. I'm sorry. But thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's probably, other than Election Day, would it be the biggest day in politics, the budget day per year?
Yeah, definitely. Budget day is the big day.
Yeah. Watching some of the highlights of commentary after the budget was delivered, watching James Shaw talking about, he kind of went, we didn't really write it ourselves. If we did write it ourselves, he used the phrase, would be more transformational, had taken a more transformational view when it came to fiscal issues. And he talked about, what the Greens would ultimately like to do is lift incomes for everyone at the bottom end, meaning, I guess, if the ones at the bottom are looked after, it trickles up. It's kind of the trickle up effect rather than what we hear so many people talking about, the trickle down, which has never worked anywhere. I think we would all agree. So in saying all of that, just tell me your reaction, first of all, I guess, to the budget, to Labour's budget, with you guys, I guess, not part of government, but certainly kindred spirits, and also as a part of it, Madam as a minister, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are the thoughts?
There's a lot of good Green stuff in the budget, despite Labour not needing our votes. And that's where I think the Greens have made a huge contribution, especially in the emissions reduction plan, which was announced on Monday, so the climate plan. We would go way further. So there's some good things in the budget that the Greens started. Increases extensions to Warm Up New Zealand, so that's the home insulation program. There's 16 million for community energy, so that could be solar. There is the green, effectively what we campaigned on is the green card, and I worked on as minister last term, a permanent 50% reduction on all public transport for anyone with a community services card. So that would be people on low incomes, and most students are eligible for community services card.
Right.
So that's good. And it's not enough. There was a huge program for prevention of sexual and family violence, which Jan Logie, my colleague, started last term, and now Minister Marama Davidson is looking after. And I mean, there just wouldn't be billions of dollars funding climate action if it weren't for James Shaw and the Green Party. But if it were a green budget, or if the Greens held the balance of power, we would see a step change in all of these things. We would see a guaranteed minimum income. We would see overhaul of the tax system so that it's actually fair with a wealth tax. That would help pay for the increases that are desperately needed to health services, to paying our health workers, to paying ECE teachers, to paying, all of those people doing important work at the coalface. It's like Labour goes like partway there, and then we could go much further. And then finally on, just something close to my heart, transport. We don't see subsidies for e-bikes or cargo bikes, which would be a far more effective way to reduce climate emissions and reduce people's, the amount they're having to pay for oil. So it would reduce oil dependency, it would help with cost of living because it costs next to nothing to run those. It reduces congestion. Not everybody can use an e-bike, but if you can get 10% of the cars on the road at peak time on e-bikes, then you effectively have no traffic, plus you're benefiting those people, and they're just much cheaper than EVs. So, and then there was not enough going into infrastructure for trains and buses around the country. If we're going to be serious about reducing emissions from transport, we have to really step up investment there.
When you say there's a lot of green things in the budget, do you mean Labour has taken on board what you guys have been always talked about, or do you mean the Greens also had some, be it official or unofficial, input into this budget as well? Like, were the Greens consulted on this budget to help get that stuff in, or is just Labour becoming, not to use the trademark, but more green?
A bit of both. I mean, I noticed the Prime Minister proudly announcing the discount for community service card holders. She didn't explicitly credit the Greens with that, even though that was something we were pushing for all last term. But where James Shaw has direct oversight over the emissions reduction plan, the climate plan, he will have been pushing for certain things. He won't have gotten them all because it's a Labour cabinet and they ultimately make the call, but he will have convinced them. And so that in some ways it's directly because of the Greens, and then in another sense, there was pass-through, the change to the pass-through on the child support payments to those on benefits, which will be a significant increase in payments to sole parent beneficiaries. And so that's really important to end child poverty. That's something the Greens have been talking about forever, and that's in the budget. So that's good. And that would be, I would say, something we achieved indirectly.
Obviously, the usual characters, the usual cast of characters have come out poo-pooing everything that is in there. Although I did notice, and we've already played this, that David Seymour has been getting some criticism from economists saying he doesn't understand the budget, which is interesting. But from the Greens' perspective, are there any clangers in there? Are there anything in there that you kind of go, I wish this wouldn't be there, and if we had been balance of power, maybe we could have kept it out?
There's quite a lot in defense spending and police, where we would say, look, the money should be going on things that are actually going to benefit us in the medium to long term, that aren't just a response to knee-jerk, what's going to really reduce crime, reducing poverty and inequality, and supporting people through rehabilitative processes. Most of the people in prison have brain injuries, mental illness,
right?
Like that. Just locking them up isn't solving the problem. In fact, it just creates more crime, locking a bunch of people up together. So, we would like to see a completely different approach to justice and defense. Admittedly, in this world, defense is going to be important, but is it more important than defending ourselves against climate change? Probably not.
I guess the thing with the defense budget is that's a perceived immediate threat. I mean, look what's happening in Ukraine. Climate change is like I'm not saying this is appropriate, but people can go, we can handle that tomorrow, but we've got people with guns in our city right now. So I'm not suggesting one is more important than the other, but I think the reality of one is more immediate than the other for some parts of the world, I guess.
I was going to say the Cash for Clunkers program, which does offer a subsidy for public transport or e-bikes as well as a low emissions vehicle.
Yeah.
Is like a very, I can understand the appeal of a program like that. And it's useful. And yet the amount of money that we're spending on it, arguably we could achieve much more if we spent that money on other improvements to transport.
The Cash for Clunkers, though, I'm intrigued by that, because I think so often, like here in this show, what we've been talking about is meaningful change and meaningful difference. And so when I hear about tax cuts from one side, being $10 a week versus taking $1 billion out of the tax cake, it's not a meaningful change. And I think even the most hard up person in New Zealand, I'm not deriding them and trying to act like some middle class comfortable person, but $10 is not going to make the difference of life and death, put it that way. Whereas $1 billion out of our tax take could make a big difference to how the country runs. I'm worried that the Cash for Clunkers is going to be a $10 a week tax cut, not a meaningful change, because I've done the numbers. And my car has a ridiculously terrible, petrol efficiency at the moment. I'm exactly the person that would get into this if I could, but it's still going to likely be well beyond my reach. And there's really some really simple things we could do to help that. What if we took the GST off those cars as well, those EVs? There's another $12,000 to $15,000 off an $80,000 vehicle. You could quite simply and quite easily get it down by $30,000 to $35,000 if you included GST, and then that might make a meaningful difference. My car on the open market at the moment, even though it's a 2008, 2009, is worth about 12 grand. Why would I clunk it for 10 when I can sell it for 12? But then that doesn't achieve the objective of getting it off the road and stop these gas guzzlers. So I really do hope that when it eventually comes out, it's not just going to be around the edges, the equivalent of a $10 a week tax cut, because what I want to see is meaningful change to help all these things we're talking about, especially when it comes to things like climate change.
Yeah, I think it does turn out to be quite expensive to really make a difference with it. You have to spend a huge amount of money, and arguably you can do more meaningful things with that money. But it is a problem. We've got a really old car fleet, relatively polluting one, and we've got probably more cars than people who can legally drive in the country. So
yeah,
we're going to have to phase them out somehow and replace them with cleaner vehicles and better public transport. And for those who can use them, e-bikes, cargo bikes, which can be really, really useful.
Yeah. Hey, look, just finally on the point that James Shaw made about if it was the Greens budget, it would be more about lifting incomes for everyone at the bottom end, like I said earlier. How would the Greens do that? how do you lift wages for everyone at the bottom end?
Well, we're saying lift incomes for everyone. So that's not just about wages. That is about income support. And we, at the last election, we campaigned on a guaranteed minimum income, which would have been quite considerable increase to base benefits. And then for sickness and for other more children, all of that, you get a top up. And it would mean that nobody would be living in poverty in New Zealand. At the same time, rent controls. I mean, like if you keep putting up incomes, but you don't do anything about rents, then it gets eaten up by the landlord class who are just raking it in. So rent controls and the wealth tax also would help, I think, level out the housing market to something reasonable so that everyone can have a home, whether they're renting or own, and would also raise a lot of revenue that we use to pay for our income support.
Alrighty then, finance spokesperson for the Greens, the Honourable Julie Anne Genter. Julie Anne, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and I'm excited by all the pictures on the back wall behind you. There's so I'm looking forward to some artwork being up there as well at some stage, and I really appreciate you giving us some time today, and it's great to see you again.
Have a good night.
Turn that microphone on, don't I? Alrighty, that's us, we're done. Now, if anyone is still hanging around and wants to know what's happening tomorrow, we've got a bit of a special on tomorrow. Dr. Anna Brooks is going to be joining us. Dr. Anna Brooks is from Auckland University. She's going to be with us for the whole hour, so she'll be kind of taking that co-hosting role, sort of what Jeremy has done tonight, or if you've been watching any of our other products, what the other co-host does. So Anna Brooks will be coming along. She is a researcher at Auckland University, and her area of expertise or area of interest research at the moment is long COVID. So tomorrow night we are going to be talking about a bunch of stuff around COVID specifically, but what we also want to do is whether you are a hermit in the world at the moment hiding from COVID, whether you are telling everyone you're boosted but you're not, whether you're an anti-vaccine person, whether you're an anti-mandate person, whether you are Dr. Fauci watching from America, whoever you are, we want to give you an opportunity to ask Anna. Hashtag Ask Anna. So if you want to know more about that and you're not already doing it, then what you could do is follow me on Twitter, just at Pat Brittenden. And if you follow me on Twitter, is it there? Where is it? It's hard to do this because all anniversary goes boop, ding. Do you remember the real typewriters? My mum was a typist. We had a real typewriter. It was always fun hitting that thing and going. And we'll be up for any question. Yep, we'll be up for any question tomorrow night as a part of this conversation. Now, as you know, with what we do, I mean, like there are lots of comments that have come in tonight. We could start putting some of them up now. Big fix for health will be a single computer system across DHBs to allow simple transfer of patients' notes. We've already mentioned Kim's one. Emperor says the debt of DHB is recurring under funding, so not one-off as it establishes the revenue baseline. The hospital redevelopment is only the first step, but only half the amount of funding is funding required. And lots of other people as well. Lots of people in there with lots of interesting comments. This one there. It's really weird that all these loopy doomsdayers with their bunkers in the middle of nowhere may have been right all along. So we will share questions and stuff. So follow me on Twitter, and I will be reminding people tomorrow that they can ask Anna, and we'll be chatting tomorrow night. And if you know someone who, I mean, wherever you sit, if you know someone who, like, let's say you're someone who accepts and believes all the science around COVID, but you know people who aren't, get them to come along. And if you're the reverse, if you think everyone's got it wrong and you not taking the vaccine is right, then convince your people to come along and tell us why. And tomorrow night, 10 p.m, we'll spend an hour. Well, we'll spend as long as we want, but up to an hour probably, talking about where we're at the moment, what the research is showing at the moment. I saw a terrifying statistic the other day that said potentially up to 200,000 people, or 10% of people who have caught Omicron, may suffer from long COVID situations. And the long COVID situation might be the next wave of it's not a pandemic per se because it's not a virus or an illness, but it might be the next significant public health issue around the world might be long COVID. Not from people who are getting sick now, but who are still suffering in months and years from now from issues around COVID that they're catching now. So we'll find out all about that, and we'll chat about it tomorrow night. It's Friday night. It's a bit different because, you know, you may be heading out, you might be doing stuff, it's a social night, but we'll still be here at 10. I mean, long term, if we keep it at this time, if we keep it at 10 o'clock, maybe we'll just run Monday to Thursday, and on Friday nights do an interview or something like that. I don't know. We're always open to your thoughts around that and how you've been enjoying it at what time slot as well. But for now, tomorrow night, 10 p.m., come on board with me and with Dr. Anna Brooks and Ask Anna as we talk COVID and where we're at right now here in Big Hairy News. Other than that, me and the dog going upstairs to go to bed, separate rooms, and I'll catch you tomorrow from 10. And if you are a fan of the of the genre of podcast, then tomorrow morning at about 9 o'clock, I think I'm releasing it. Podcast with, let me just bring it up to show you. You can get it on iTunes or Spotify, or else you can go to the DOC page. And right there. There we go. Oh gosh, I've unshared my screen. Oh, no, I haven't. There it is. It's just that I'm by myself. You can have a look at the Shawn Plunkett podcast tomorrow morning, which gets released at 9:15 a.m., 6:30 a.m. on iTunes and Spotify. So maybe if you're in Auckland and you're driving to work or something, you can have a listen to the conversation I had with Shawn Plunkett, which was really interesting. We come from very different political worlds, I think, but it was interesting to talk to Shawn about what he's trying to do and what he's trying to achieve with his new media empire. All right, that's me. I'm done. Thanks, guys. Enough pushing, enough advertising of other things. We'll see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. on Big Hairy News.